481 The Terrifying Power of Calamity Part 1. Chu Zan looked at the three experts as they continued their attack on the Great Tao. After watching for a while, Chu Zan felt that he had to do something. Although the three of them were destined to return empty-handed, the 9 zones belonged to him, so letting them off unscathed seemed unwise. It even seemed like they were using the Great Tao's power of rejection to temper their Tao paths. If he left them alone, they would probably return to do this regularly. Thinking this, Chu Zan decided to cause some trouble for these guys. Although the power of calamity with the Great Tao was not spreading, it was still present. It was an uncertain factor. If it contaminated the heavenly Tao laws, it would be a little troublesome. Chu Zan decided to use these three experts as experimental subjects. If the power of calamity could even affect Yi Yujun, a creature of the Great Tao, how would it affect these supreme experts? In any case, Chu Zan suspected that the power of calamity was related to the Great Tao calamity. He immediately contacted Yi Yujun. Do you know where the power of calamity is on the Great Tao? Is there any way to get some? It's not a problem to hold on to some for a short period of time, but what does fellow Taoist Chu want it for? Yi Yujun asked, puzzled. Chu Zan laughed evilly and said, see those three big idiots? Let's give them some of it. Yi Yujun's eyes lit up. I'll go and get some now. The show would become more exciting now. Yi Yujun immediately left and headed over to where the power of calamity was brewing. Kun Zhen, Divine Lord Du, and Mo Zun were still resisting the Great Tao's power of rejection. From their relative positions, one could roughly judge their levels of strength. Mo Zun was probably the strongest. Divine Lord Du was slightly weaker. However, the strength of the Great Tao's power of rejection they faced was different, so he could not make an accurate judgment. Overall though, the gap in strength between them should not be too big. Chu Zan had been observing the differences between the three supreme experts' Tao paths. Mo Zun's Tao path was extremely brutal and overbearing. It contained the Tao principles of bloodlust and destruction. Divine Lord Du's Tao path was vast and mighty, and contained a trace of holy power. The Tao paths of the Immortal, Celestial, and Demon races all had their own similarities within their respective races, and it was the same for the monster race. However, the Tao paths of the human race did not have any similarities. There were all sorts of oddities and differences. Even the inheritances of the same bloodline might not have similarities. This was a special feature of the human race. Kun Zhen belonged to a primeval race, so the Tao path he had opened contained elements of chaos power, and the Tao principles contained within it were also different. It was thus very easy to distinguish between the Tao paths of the various races, whether from the races of the 9 zones or that of the primeval races. This piqued Chu Zan's curiosity. What was the Tao path of chaotic beings like? Yi Yujun soon came back, and his body was wrapped in a special aura. Huang Long and Gui Ran quickly moved aside. Chu Zan waved his hand and cut off the live broadcast. His disciples were still immersed in their enlightenment, as were the members of the group chat. Hong Yuanchu and the others were stunned. Why did Chu Zan suddenly turn off the live broadcast? Chu Zan said in the group chat, that is the power of calamity. Before you reach the 10,000-mile Tao path mark, you shouldn't look at it directly, or it might contaminate your fate. Hong Yuanchu and the rest were shocked. The power of calamity. Would their fate really be tainted with misfortune just by looking at it? 482 The Terrifying Power of Calamity Part 2. This terrified them. Chu Zan had also been shocked. Fortunately, he had acted quickly enough before any of them saw anything and were contaminated. It was too terrifying. Chu Zan was now curious as to how it would affect the three supreme experts. Furthermore, he had gained a better understanding of the creatures of the Great Tao, who were strong enough to fight off the power of calamity to some extent, at least within the Great Tao where they were basically immortal. The power of Kun Zhen's Tao path had been greatly consumed, and he could no longer move forward. At this moment, he was ready to retreat. Divine Lord Du and Mo Zun were also thinking likewise. At this moment, the three of them saw a huge black shadow fly out of the 9 zones. It was a strange bird that none of them had seen or heard of before, even from their time in the 9 zones back then. A 10-winged bird. Yi Yujun's true form was the 10-winged darkness-devouring roc, and he rushed over like a dark shadow. Kun Zhen and the other two's eyes narrowed. What had happened in the 9 territories? Why did such a powerful creature appear? Could it be that they had been beaten to the punch? How was that possible? Furthermore, the power of this strange bird's Tao path was terrifying. It had an aura that was almost identical to the Great Tao of the 9 zones. It even seemed to be the darkness Tao principle of the great Tao of the 9 zones. Who are you? Identify yourself. At this moment, there was a tacit understanding between the 3 supreme experts, who joined forces to try and take Yi Yujun down. I'm giving you an opportunity, Yi Yujun called out. The power of his Tao path instantly gushed out of his body and swept toward the 3 supreme experts before he turned around and fled back into the great Tao. Who? The power of calamity attached to that attack swept over the 3 supreme experts. Not good. The 3 supreme experts' hearts beat wildly. The power of calamity began to invade their Tao paths. At this moment, they felt a sense of impending doom. Boom! The 3 of them quickly flew away while frantically circulating the power of their Tao paths, trying to remove and purify the power of calamity. However, things were not so easy, and the power of calamity even began to erode the power of their Tao paths and continued to spread. Their expressions changed drastically. What was this strange thing? Was it related to the great Tao calamity? The 3 of them were terrified. What kind of existence was that? Why was he able to spit this strange power out? What had happened to the great Tao of the 9 zones? 3 figures flew away from the great Tao and kept their distance from each other. They were afraid that they would be affected by the power of calamity and suddenly start fighting each other, or whether it would trigger some sort of wide-reaching calamity. Behind them, the onlookers were all stunned, and then their expressions changed drastically. The 3 supreme experts looked like they were covered in an aura of misfortune. Furthermore, they felt that even looking at the aura might cause it to spread toward them. Shua! They quickly retreated in fear. What had happened in the 9 zones? If even these supreme experts could not resist that strange power, they would die without a doubt if they were contaminated by it. Yang also retreated further into the distance. He looked bewildered. What was going on? Was this the herald of the great Tao calamity? Was the great Tao calamity going to involve that strange aura? He could not help but recall the records of the human race. 3 of the 10 ancestors of the human race had died. According to the records, 1 of them had died during a great Tao calamity. Was it due to this strange aura? Mo Zun and the other 2 roared continuously. The power of their Tao paths surged continuously, and they used every means and treasure they had to expel the power of calamity. However, anything that came into contact with the power of calamity would also be contaminated. It seemed impossible to expel it. Furthermore, the power of calamity had started to spread along their Tao paths. The impending sense of doom became stronger. It was as if a great disaster was about to befall them at any moment. If this thing spread throughout their entire Tao path, they could not imagine what the consequences would be. Something's not right. This isn't ordinary. Divine light blossomed around Divine Lord Du, not to purify the power of calamity but to prevent further contamination. How can it be so terrifying? Mo Zun's expression also changed. The power of calamity they were familiar with involved the misfortune and calamity Tao principles. However, such a thing should not have been able to threaten them. However, this thing was different. It was like the nemesis of their Tao paths, slowly eating away at it. Was it really related to the great Tao calamity? If this great Tao calamity was filled with such a terrifying power of calamity, even them as supreme experts would be at risk. Mo Zun roared and his huge Tao path appeared in the chaos. At the end of his Tao path, a little gray mark appeared. This was the portion of his Tao path that had been contaminated by the power of calamity. Break. Boom. A small section of his Tao path instantly broke off and separated. Mo Zun was extremely decisive as he directly cut off the contaminated portion of his Tao path. Even though it was only a small portion of his Tao path, it still represented tens of thousands of years of cultivation. When Divine Lord Du saw this, he gritted his teeth and followed suit. If he allowed it to spread, he would only lose more of his Tao path. Their actions shocked the onlookers. What kind of strange power was it that even supreme experts like them were forced to cut off a portion of their Tao paths? It was too terrifying. Kun Zhen saw it, and had no choice but to follow suit. However, he had opened his Tao path in the chaos. Even if it was just a tiny portion cut off, it was a great loss to him. For the same length of Tao path, he lost more than 100,000 years of cultivation. Kun Zhen roared unwillingly. Boom. All 3 experts had cut off their Tao paths. Even if it had no significant bearing on their strength, it caused a great commotion among the onlookers. 483 The Terrifying Power of Calamity Part 3. The broken portions of their Tao paths floated in the chaos, slowly dissipating along with waves of their power. The 3 of them had cut off hundreds of miles of the Tao paths. Although hundreds of miles were nothing to them, the meaning of it was significant. The experts in the distance looked at the scene in the chaos with grave expressions. This was the first time they had seen these supreme experts' Tao paths. Those 3 Tao paths, whether in terms of lengths or stability, far surpassed their own. Exclamation mark! However, even they were unable to purify that strange aura and were forced to cut off a portion of their Tao paths. As the portion of their Tao paths dissipated, the power of calamity was left behind. Kun Zhen and the other 2 all had ugly expressions. What was even more detestable was that they did not even know who the other party was. Fortunately, the losses this time were not great, only a small section of their Tao paths were lost. The 3 of them looked at each other gloomily. They realized that the power of calamity they were familiar with was completely different from this one. Was this power of calamity already present in the 9 zones? If it could even erode the great Tao of the 9 zones, it would be too terrifying. The 3 of them started to move closer to each other again, wanting to discuss and share their insights into their respective experiences with the power of calamity. If there were differences in their Tao paths, abilities to resist the power of calamity, perhaps they would be able to find a way to counteract it. However, their expressions suddenly changed. In the chaos, a gray light appeared out of nowhere right above them, exuding the power of calamity. Boom! Gray lightning sliced through the chaos, flashing toward them. At this moment, the 3 of them felt as if a great calamity had befallen them. Even though they had cut off a portion of their Tao paths, there were still aftereffects. The onlookers were so frightened that their faces turned pale, and they frantically fled, afraid that they would be infected and affected by the power of calamity. It was too terrifying. Gray lightning had appeared in the chaos. Lightning born from the chaos was tribulation lightning. Even 9 extreme Daoyuan realm cultivators could easily be killed by it. It was something that they had only heard of in legends. Kun Zhen and the other 2 moved quickly. Their Tao paths instantly appeared, and their bodies shrank in an instant, becoming only a few feet tall. When going through a tribulation, one naturally had to condense one's body into its strongest state. Boom! The gray lightning descended, and the power of the 3 Tao paths, resisting the lightning. When the 2 forces collided, their Tao paths shook. Streaks of gray lightning slithered along their Tao path like small snakes, causing ripples. Kun Zhen and the other 2 kept retreating further and further away from where the power of calamity was. Now, their auras were unstable, and the power of their Tao paths had weakened. It took a long time before the effects of the gray lightning were finally offset. The 3 of them heaved a sigh of relief, but remained vigilant in case another lightning bolt appeared. In the end, it was only one, so rejoiced inwardly that they had cut off a portion of their Tao paths so decisively. Otherwise, things would not have ended with just that lightning bolt, and it might even have ended up threatening their lives. When they thought about this, they shuddered. Suddenly, they turned to look at the place where the power of calamity was, and were stunned to find that the power of calamity seemed to be fading. It was as if it had been digested by the chaos. It was like a drop of ink falling into a large lake. It would only leave a trace for a short period of time before being assimilated and disappearing without a trace. Looking back at the 9 zones, their expressions became serious. What kind of existence was that strange bird? They no longer had any thoughts of challenging the great Tao, as the time had not come yet. They would continue to use the plans they had set up in the 9 zones instead to figure out just what was going on in the 9 zones before deciding on their next plan of action. As long as the great Tao's power of rejection was not eliminated, they would not be able to enter the 9 zones. To do so, they had to wait for the great Tao calamity to descend for an opportunity. Even then, there was no guarantee of success. In the 9 zones, Huang Long and the other 2 returned, and the group chat also turned silent. Hong Yuanchu and the others had already gathered together in private to exchange their thoughts on the situation, as well as on how powerful those supreme experts were. Although they were Daoyuan realm cultivators as well, they felt infinitely weaker than the 3 experts they had seen today. At the same time, they had gained a lot from watching the 3 experts attack the great Tao, which would be helpful in their efforts to extend their Tao paths. The Tao realm members of the group chat, as well as Ding Yu and the others, were all in the midst of enlightenment and comprehension. Chu Zan kept monitoring the situation. He had sensed some fluctuations from the chaos, so he speculated that they were struggling to deal with the power of calamity. There was even a particularly large fluctuation, but he was too far away to sense what it was or what had caused it. In any case, if even such supreme experts could not deal with the power of calamity easily, it meant that the power calamity was even more terrifying than he anticipated. If it really was the sign of the Great Tao Calamity, then the Great Tao Calamity would be unprecedentedly dangerous. If the power of calamity spread throughout the 9 zones, then no one would survive. However, this was not the first time the Great Tao Calamity had occurred. If things were this terrifying, then how did all these experts survive it previously? Chu Zan frowned. Could it be that the Great Tao Calamity this time around was extraordinary? If the Great Tao of the 9 zones could not get rid of the power of calamity, then the heavenly Tao laws stood no chance as well. Luckily, the power of calamity seemed to still be dormant, and was not expanding. Chu Zan looked at the 9 zones. The ominous beings were about to disappear, which meant that the Great Tao Yuan Calamity was about to end. What would come after would be the Great Tao Calamity. However, aside from the power of calamity, there were no other signs of it. Chu Zan felt that he had to make some preparations to keep himself safe. Ancient Chaos World. Taoist Flying Cloud was watching the battle from a distance behind a group of 9 extreme Taoyuan realm experts. The appearance of the power of calamity made him realize that something was wrong, especially when the 3 supreme experts failed to deal with it. Something unknown must have happened in the 9 zones. He did not continue to watch, but returned to his mountain residence. Yang watched from afar, his eyes filled with uncertainty. The appearance of the tribulation lightning had shocked him. Still, it was a pity. Despite all of that, the supreme experts were not injured. Suddenly, he sensed someone's gaze. Mo Zun, how can you lowly humans be allowed to spy on this place? Mo Zun snorted coldly. In an instant, he charged toward Yang. With a wave of his hand, the power of his Tao path surged and attempted to suppress Yang. The 10th ancestor of the human race. You're just an ant. I'll kill you today. Yang's expression changed. The power of his Tao path surged out in layers, and 9 stars lit up. Boom. His body also grew to 10,000 feet tall in an instant as he hurled a punch. Mo Zun was far superior to Tian Mo Lai, so he had to go all out. He activated his Tao path secret technique right off the bat. In the distance, Tian Mo Lai was sporting a gloomy expression. At this moment, the strength that Yang displayed far surpassed that of when they fought previously. Yang was the weakest among the 10 ancestors of the human race, yet he was not someone Tian Mo Lai could deal with. Still, he was no match for Mo Zun. Boom. Yang's all-out attack only slightly slowed down the speed of Mo Zun's approaching giant hand. Boom. Boom. Yang threw punch after punch. The power of his Tao path continued to stack and layer as he bombarded the giant hand with attacks. His figure kept retreating, and his attacks became stronger and stronger. In just a few short breaths of time, his power had already increased threefold. Terrifying. The experts from the other races had grave expressions on their faces. None of the 9 extreme Taoyuan realm experts present were Yang's match. This Tao path secret technique, which seemed to be able to infinitely stack and layer power, would eventually allow him to defeat anyone of the same level. Unless they suppressed Yang right from the start and did not give him the chance to use the Tao path secret technique. However, who in the same rank could do that? Even if Yang did not use the secret technique, he was still powerful enough to go up against any of the 9 extreme Taoyuan realm experts here. 485 The 10th Ancestor in Danger Part 2. Interesting. Mo Zun's expression turned even colder. The power of the giant hand grew stronger and stronger. He wanted to see if Yang could really keep stacking and layering his power indefinitely. Yang's strength had already exceeded the limits of a 9 extreme Taoyuan realm expert, and would be evenly matched against ordinary freedom Taoyuan realm experts. This was evidence of how powerful this Tao path secret technique was. Boom. Yang continued to punch as he retreated. The power of his attacks had now reached the 10-fold mark, shocking everyone present. The 10 ancestors of the human race were indeed monstrous talents. Even Yang, who was the weakest among them, was already invincible within the 9 extreme Taoyuan realm. Mo Zun's killing intent intensified. Yang had to die. If he was allowed to surpass the 9 extreme Taoyuan realm, armed with this Tao path secret technique, very few people would be his match. However, after reaching the 10-fold mark, Yang seemed to have reached the limit of his Tao path secret technique. Many people heaved a sigh of relief. If the power of his Tao path could really be layered infinitely, that would be truly terrifying. Boom. The power of Mo Zun's giant hand instantly increased as he pressed the attack, crushing Yang's punches and causing cracks to appear all over his 10,000-foot-tall body. PFF'd. He spat out blood and was sent flying. Die. Mo Zun's Tao path appeared, surging with power. He wanted to kill Yang right here and now. The difference in strength between the two sides was too great. Even if Yang did his best, he could not resist a supreme expert. His 10,000-foot-tall body began to crack, and his Dao path shook as if it was about to collapse under the pressure. The various races that were watching the battle watched silently. Was another 9 extreme Daoyuan realm expert going to die? Still, this was to their benefit. None of them wanted to see the human race develop and grow stronger, and seeing Yang's strength had further confirmed this. If they allowed the human race to develop, they would eventually be surpassed. 3 of the 10 ancestors of the human race had already fallen. Was another one going to fall today? These experts would never forget that unparalleled murderer who had slaughtered the experts of all the races. He was the most brutal one in human history. 486 Hong, the 4th ancestor of the human race. Part 1. Yang was in a life-or-death situation. He was even prepared to send his wisp of consciousness into Yang Tian's body at the last moment. Of course, he would not do that unless it was the last resort. Furthermore, if he wanted to do so successfully, he had to prevent Mo Zun from interfering with its descent. His body continued to crack, and his Dao path showed signs of collapsing. Yang's expression was gloomy, and he had already separated a wisp of his consciousness from his body, wrapping it in the power of his Dao path. It also triggered Yang Tian's bloodline, creating a suction force. In the 9 zones, the originally calm chaos suddenly began to fluctuate again. Chu Zan raised an eyebrow. Was there a battle? Moreover, it was not too far away from the 9 zones. Both sides seemed to be extremely powerful. Was it a conflict between the 3 supreme experts? Would another expert die? Chu Zan started paying attention to the fluctuations in the chaos. The battle seemed to be getting more and more intense. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at Yang Tian. A suction force appeared from Yang Tian's body, guided by his bloodline. Yang. A battle had broken out in the chaos, and Yang Tian's bloodline had been activated. The first person he thought of was Yang. One of the parties involved in the battle was Yang. Moreover, in the face of a fatal crisis, was he preparing to escape with his wisp of consciousness? Was he going to possess Yang Tian? Or rely on this wisp of consciousness to reform his physical body and rise again? Chu Zan hesitated, wondering whether he should stop the other party's wisp of consciousness from descending. If he did, Yang would die without a doubt. If he did not stop him, what would happen if he possessed Yang Tian? No matter what, Yang Tian was a heaven's blessed of the 9 zones, so it was a bit of a loss to be possessed by an old monster. Chu Zan hesitated for a moment but in the end chose not to stop him. In any case, Yang's wisp of consciousness would not be able to cause any waves. In the 9 zones, as long as he did not allow it, he would not be able to successfully possess Yang Tian. Perhaps he could use this opportunity to learn about some of the secrets of the human race. Moreover, although Yang was preparing to flee, he might not really die. The 10th ancestor was definitely not weak. Furthermore, did the human race really not have any supreme experts? Without a supreme expert, how could they have survived in the chaos for so long? They would have been surrounded and easily vanquished by the other races, especially if any of the supreme experts from the other races took action. Therefore, Chu Zan surmised that the human race definitely had a supreme expert. Only 3 of the 10 ancestors of the human race had died. There were still 7 more to go. Someone would probably save Yang, right? Chu Zan also wondered if the power of calamity had affected those 3 supreme experts. Has their strength been weakened? Yang is going to die. In the chaos, the experts from various races spoke softly. The 9 extreme Daoyuan realm experts present felt a chill run down their spines. Supreme experts were so much more powerful than they were. Even though Yang's Dao Path secret technique multiplied the power of the Dao Path tenfold, he was still no match for Mo Zun. The difference was simply too great. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out in the chaos. The demon race seems to like bullying the weak. Mo Zun, this is beneath your status. A white light suddenly appeared. With a simple strike, he destroyed Mo Zun's attack. Yang's figure shrunk and he retreated frantically. Mo Zun did not continue to attack. Instead, his expression turned serious. He looked at the place where the white light had appeared. A figure was hovering there, a tall man in a green robe, who had a rather valiant aura. Yang quickly retreated behind him. He heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He had almost died. Hong, Mo Zun said with a dark expression. In the distance, Divine Lord Du's expression changed as well. His figure flashed and reappeared close to Mo Zun's. The 4th ancestor of the human race, Hong. Mo Zun, Hong chuckled, are you going to lead the demons to their downfall? From my impression, the demon race has always been arrogant and prideful. They don't like to bully the weak. How did your demon race stoop to this level? Then, his gaze gradually turned cold. Do you think that there's no experts among the human race? Believe it or not, I'll do the same thing and kill your nephew, Tian Mo Lai. 487 Hong, the fourth ancestor of the human race Part 2. Hong, are you that confident that you actually dare to threaten my demon race? The demonic power around Mo Zun's body surged as he spoke. His words were laced with killing intent. Threatening your demon race is not a problem. Hong sneered, believe it or not, the human race can specifically target the demon race. I'd like to see if your supposed allies will save your race in spite of the losses they will face. Mo Zun's expression turned even colder. Exclamation mark. Hong, stop bluffing, Divine Lord Du laughed. Do you really think that we're stupid enough to watch the demon race suffer alone? Indeed, you won't, at least not in principle. However, even if the celestial race and immortal race want to rescue them, you'll have to sacrifice a few of your 9 extreme Daoyuan realm and freedom Daoyuan realm cultivators, you know, Hong said with a smile. It was a tacit understanding. The demon race knew this, and so did the immortal race and the celestial race. The human race was not weak. Whoever really forced the human race into a corner would most likely bear the brunt of the damage, and would most likely fall behind the other 2 major races. To the other 2 races, this was not necessarily a bad thing. After all, it would be good to have one less competitor for the 9 zones. I'd like to see how far your cultivation has progressed today. Mo Zun's Dao path appeared. He did not dare to be careless when facing Hong. Back then, all the races had wanted to kill Hong, but in the end, they all became his stepping stones, and his rise was unstoppable. He seemed to be protected by fate. When the experts from the various races attacked, accidents happened frequently, resulting in him escaping every time. Many of them were killed by Hong instead. He had once again the human race to escape the dangers of extermination and to become a powerful race. Back then, Hong and the other 2 supreme experts of the human race had left the 9 zones for the chaos with the intention of intimidating the other races. With Hong's strength, if he were to conceal himself and appear suddenly to attack, no one but other supreme experts would be able to survive. This was also one of the reasons why the human race had not been exterminated. It was too difficult to surround and kill their supreme experts. The other party's fate was so strong that they would always avoid fatal danger. A sword appeared in Hong's hand. Mo Zun, you're just a loser. I defeated you back then, and I'll do the same today. Then he made a stabbing motion, and it seemed like the chaos space between them had been torn apart. The sword appeared in front of Mo Zun in an instant. Roar! Mo Zun howled and the power of his Dao path appeared. A huge hammer appeared in his hand that he swung to meet the sword. Boom! The sword tore through his defense and left a deep wound on his chest. Boom! Mo Zun's figure staggered back as he stared at Hong with a dark expression. He had lost. You're still lacking. Hong chuckled and disappeared with Yang in a flash. Mo Zun's expression was extremely dark. He thought back to the past when he was defeated by Hong with a single strike. It was still the same now. Divine Lord Du's expression was also extremely solemn. In terms of strength, he was slightly weaker than Mo Zun. The experts from the other races were all shocked. The 4th ancestor of the human race was so strong. Kun Zhen was also shocked. He had never fought with a human before, but he knew how strong Mo Zun was. His heart grew heavy. He had to reconsider whether he should also target the human race like the other races in the 9 zones. Other than Yang, only a few of the 10 ancestors of the human race had died. How strong were the rest? Hong was the 4th ancestor, then what about the 1st and 2nd? Hong's actions today were also meant to intimidate the other races. Without the strength of the immortal, celestial, and demon races, there was no way they could target the human race. They would be slaughtered like pigs. Furthermore, they had to avoid being used as cannon fodder by the 3 major races. HMPH. Mo Zun snorted coldly. Then, he turned around and left. All of the cultivators also returned to the ancient chaos world. Mo Zun suddenly seemed to have thought of something as he suddenly turned around and headed in Swordthorn's direction. Many people's eyes flickered. Mo Zun wanted to subdue Swordthorn. Swordthorn was strong, and even Freedom Daoyuan realm experts were unable to best him. However, could he actually be compared to Mo Zun? Definitely not. However, a figure suddenly appeared where Swordthorn was. Hong. Mo Zun's expression turned even colder. Then, Swordthorn flew up and actually left with Hong. HMPH. Mo Zun snorted coldly once more and turned back to look at the 9 zones. It was time to carry out some plans. Something must have happened in the 9 zones. Otherwise, why would the power of calamity suddenly appear? The great Tao calamity this time around was bound to be extraordinary. Although he had severed the source of his Tao path, and the great Tao calamity might not be able to affect him, with these sudden changes, he was not too sure anymore. Furthermore, the 9 zones were vital to his cultivation and progress. The sudden expansion of the 9 zones signified a new opportunity, so he had to make preparations to seize it. Mo Zun briefly looked into the depths of the chaos with a look of fear on his face. In this place, he was the strongest. However, in the endless chaos, he was not considered the strongest. Not to mention some chaotic beings that still existed, just those who were born when the 9 zones were created were already very terrifying. This included the first-generation ancestors of the immortal, celestial, and demon races. They were all extremely terrifying existences. No matter what, he had to take action. Even if he could not enter the 9 zones personally, he had to find a way to send a wisp of consciousness in to examine the changes that had happened in the 9 zones. Mo Zun was not the only one who had this thought, and many other experts also began their preparations in earnest. Obtaining an avatar would be the best method to ensure their success. In the 9 zones, Chuzan had been paying close attention to sensing the fluctuations in the chaos, and trying to figure out if Yang would survive. Then, he sensed an instantaneous burst of power that far exceeded what he had sensed earlier. The person who had just attacked was extremely powerful. It was also at this moment that the suction force from Yang Tian's bloodline ceased. It appeared that someone had come to his rescue. That burst of power seemed to contain a sharpness that could only be exuded by a sword, one that seemed to even be able to tear apart the fabric of chaos. Compared to this expert, Ding Yu was 108,000 light-years away. I'm still not strong enough. Chuzan sighed. At this moment, Chuzan suspected that there really was a supreme expert in the chaos whose Tao path was millions of miles long. Incidentally, the million-mile mark was also a key milestone where a qualitative transformation would occur. Chuzan could vaguely guess what his next step should be. As the 9 zones continued to expand, the heavenly Tao laws would continue to strengthen and permeate the new expanded areas. Furthermore, it would continue to infiltrate the desolate ancient zone, though this would take a long time. After all, the desolate ancient zone was the core of the 9 zones, and contained the primordial land and the heavenly domain. There were too many existences and secrets hidden there. Only then could he truly control the entire 9 zones. Finally, the heavenly Tao laws had to devour and assimilate the great Tao. At the very least, he had to control half of the laws of the great Tao, and eventually all of the laws of the great Tao. Once that was complete, he would be invincible in the 9 zones. Was there an expert in the chaos who could destroy the great Tao of the 9 zones? Chuzan was not sure, but there was a high probability that such a person did not exist. The 9 zones, great Tao was born from the chaos and was closely related to the fate of the entire chaos. It was connected to the great Tao of the chaos. To destroy the great Tao of the 9 zones, one's power had to at least cause 1/3 of the chaos to shake. Who could shake 1/3 of the chaos? The chaos was so vast that no one knew its boundaries. Even if the great Tao of the 9 zones collapsed, its collapse would not shake 1/3 of the chaos. Chuzan glanced at his disciples, who were still in the process of comprehending insights, and then turned his attention to the group chat. The plans of those experts in the chaos would likely be to target these Daoyuan realm experts, right? He had to give them a reminder. After all, the heavenly domain was not under the control of the heavenly Tao laws, so he could not control the situation there. However, the heavenly domain was close to the great Tao, so the power of the rejection there was stronger and harder to penetrate. It would be very, very difficult for these experts to send their wisps of consciousness into the heavenly domain. Even so, Chuzan did not dare to be careless. One mistake could lead to devastating consequences. Changes are happening in the chaos, and the 9 zones are expanding. This is an opportunity. The experts from beyond the 9 zones will plot against you Daoyuan realm cultivators with the intention of turning you into avatars. Fellow Taoists, please be careful. Don't end up becoming puppets because you were tempted by treasures or enlightenment. Chuzan's tone was serious as he expounded on the dangers. Hong Yuanchu and the rest were shocked. Don't worry, fellow Taoist Chu. I'll remind the others, Hong Yuanchu said solemnly. Who would be willing to lose the strength that they had painstakingly cultivated and become someone else's puppet? The expansion of the 9 zones is an opportunity for enlightenment. Fellow Taoists, you should go into seclusion to gain enlightenment. You'll have great gains, so don't miss this chance. It was rare for Chuzan to give some advice. As long as these Daoyuan realm experts cultivated in seclusion, they would naturally not be easily disturbed by anything that happened in the outside world. What he was most worried about was that some people would not be able to resist the temptation of obtaining supreme treasures and become pawns of those experts from the chaos. Of course, it was almost impossible to send a supreme treasure into the heavenly domain. There was a high chance that it would be sent to another part of the 9 zones. As long as it was not in the desolate ancient zone, Chuzan would be able to control everything and make the other party's efforts go to waste. Now that the 9 zones were expanding and the opportunity to further extend their Tao paths, they were full of fighting spirit and would not be easily tempted by the treasure. After Chuzan reminded the group, he also immersed himself in cultivation. As he comprehended the changes in the expansion of the 9 zones, he began to break through the limits of the 9 extreme Daoyuan realm. He was on the verge of breaking through. After staying in the courtyard for 70 years, the system's daily rewards were getting higher and higher in level. He no longer lacked path-clearing treasures, and could easily extend his Tao path by 500 meters each day. However, that did not satisfy Chuzan. It was still too slow. At this rate, it would take forever for him to obtain a Tao path that was millions of miles long. To most Daoyuan realm experts, a few million years was nothing. To Chuzan, that was an extremely long time. He could not wait that long. Moreover, the great Tao calamity was approaching. Still, he could only persevere and hope that the system would give him some treasures while trying various schemes and plans to trigger the system's rewards. However, most of his targets were gone now, though there was still one particular big fish. The hidden expert that was targeting Heiyu, likely due to her innate divine soul. Chuzan speculated that this hidden expert was a chaotic being. Still, this too required patience, so Chuzan could only extend his Tao path day after day until an opportunity presented itself. A month later, he finally broke through the limits of the 9 extreme Daoyuan realm, with his Tao path now being 100,000 miles long. After breaking through, the 9 stars of his Tao path suddenly merged and condensed, before appearing at the source of his Tao path. With the transformation of his Tao path, his strength underwent a huge change. Chuzan heaved a sigh of relief. He had finally broken through. Still, this was merely the beginning of a new chapter of cultivation, so he had to stay focused and grounded. He took a look at the 9 zones, which were still expanding. Everything was under control and developing well. Hong Yuanchu and the other Daoyuan realm cultivators were all immersed in cultivation, having gained a lot from witnessing the Supreme Expert's attack on the Great Tao, as well as the insights from the expansion of the 9 zones. They were making great strides in extending their Tao paths, a few dozen meters daily. Sadly, this sort of explosive growth could not be maintained forever. Chuzan then looked at his disciples. Their strength had increased, and their Tao principles had strengthened. They had even comprehended new Tao principles. Chuzan decided to pass on the absolute beginning scripture and the myriad Tao technique to his disciples. Now that the great Daoyuan calamity was coming to an end, and the great Tao calamity was coming, it was a good time to cultivate. Perhaps his disciples might even reach the Daoyuan realm during the great Tao calamity. However, unlike other Daoyuan realm cultivators, their Tao paths would be opened in the heavenly Tao. Although this would make them weaker than regular Daoyuan realm cultivators, when the heavenly Tao laws devoured the great Tao, they would surpass the other Daoyuan realm cultivators. Thinking this, he decided to pour more of the heavenly Tao laws power into his disciples to speed up their cultivation and their comprehension of the heavenly Tao laws. Another half a month passed. In half a month, Chuzan had extended his Tao path by more than 1,000 miles, which was unthinkable for other Daoyuan realm cultivators, but it clearly was not enough to satisfy Chuzan. The disciples had already woken up from their state of comprehension. "Sir, you've become more unfathomable," Su Shaner exclaimed in admiration. 13th brother, have you become stronger again? Chu Yun asked curiously. Just a little, Chuzan replied humbly. Tao realm cultivation is about enlightenment, the absorption of Tao aura into the body, and the transformation of the Tao principles. Today, I will teach you the myriad Tao technique. Chuzan first passed on the myriad Tao technique to his disciples. After the disciples had all grasped it, he said, above the Tao realm is the Daoyuan realm, which requires you to open up your own Tao path. Although you lot are far from being able to achieve this, as long as you work hard, the day will come when you reach the Daoyuan realm. Today, I'll teach you the absolute beginning scripture as well. Chuzan's voice seemed to contain the will of the great Tao. He was preaching to his disciples and also passing on the absolute beginning scripture to them. Following Chuzan's lecture, the disciples gradually immersed themselves in comprehending the absolute beginning scripture. Everyone's level of talent was different, so the depth of their comprehension was naturally different. Ding Yu and the other inner disciples naturally were more talented. Qin Ying and Ren Cheng were slightly weaker. Du Yuan and Chu Yun's were a little lacking. Feng Kong's was not weak. Chuzan taught Feng Kong the absolute beginning scripture as well since the latter was already his follower. Still, with Chuzan's help, all of them would be able to reach the Daoyuan realm eventually. While his disciples remained in a state of comprehension, Chuzan began to focus again on extending his Dao path. He could not afford to relax or slack even for a day. Within a month, the disciples woke up one after another and continued to traverse the 9 zones, competing with the geniuses of the various races, crushing them. Following Chuzan's instructions, Ding Yu and the others gradually headed toward the desolate ancient zone. Their final destination was to explore the primordial land. There was no one in the 9 zones that could threaten them now. Yu did not leave with them. She was in a daze and seemed a little off. Chuzan knew that this had something to do with her innate divine soul. Yu was now a 10th level Dao realm cultivator. She had likely triggered something, which might be related to that chaotic being. Chuzan suspected that the other party had obtained the incomplete part of Yu's innate divine soul. Master, Yu woke up and knelt on the ground, saying, I can sense a call from the darkness. It seems to be from my incomplete divine soul. You can just wait quietly. You'll be fine if you don't leave the 9 zones. Chuzan paused for a moment and continued, it's a good thing that an expert has his eyes on you. Wait for him to seek you out. Wait for him to return the incomplete divine soul and provide you with opportunities. Yu was stunned. I understand, Master. Chuzan nodded. Yu was his most trusted disciple and was very efficient. She had also contributed to the implementation of the Heavenly Dao Talisman plan, accelerating the progress of its expansion into the 9 zones. There was no need to be too explicit. Yu could understand what he meant and knew what to do. Master, is it an accident or intentional that my divine soul is incomplete? Yu hesitated for a moment, but still asked. Chuzan did not know the answer, but he would not say so. That would damage his image as an all-knowing and mysterious expert in the hearts of his disciples. Whether it was an accident or intentional, it doesn't matter to you now at this juncture. When you reach the Daoyuan realm, you will naturally know the answer. Yes, Master, I understand, Yu said respectfully. Cultivate well, but at this stage, try not to leave the 9 zones, Chuzan warned. The desolate ancient zone was not completely under the control of the heavenly Dao laws, so it would be easy for things to go awry while she was there. Moreover, the Tianyu Tower was still chasing after Yu. Its founder, Tianyu, was in the desolate ancient zone. Understood, Master. I will focus on eliminating the forces of the Tianyu Tower in the 9 zones. A cold light flickered in her eyes. It was time for the Tianyu Tower to disappear from the 9 zones. Chuzan cast his eyes over the 9 zones. For the time being, no hidden experts had made their moves. It seemed like the turmoil in the chaos had made everyone take a step back to reevaluate their plans. Chuzan released some of the hidden treasure lands in the 9 zones. The chaos was still ongoing, and wars often broke out. The ominous beings had yet to be completely eradicated. Hu Tianya started to make preparations for the unification of the monster race. The other races of the 9 zones gradually formed an alliance to resist the human race, which grew in number day by day. The expansion of Buddhism continued, and Buddhism began to spread in the 9 zones in pockets. In particular, some temples had appeared in the human territory. The ghost race had also become stronger. It was also constantly expanding. However, the ghost race controlled the ghost world, and had no intention of occupying any of the 9 zones. Furthermore, the reincarnation cycle had just been established, and a portion of the ghost race's experts were responsible for maintaining it. The position of the ghost race was already very clear. They lived in the ghost world, from which they roamed the 9 zones. The Buddha world was also developing. If the plan went well and the heavenly Tao laws devoured the great Tao of the 9 zones, then both the ghost world and the Buddhist world would be incorporated into it as well. He considered opening up another world, but he needed a sufficiently strong vessel as the foundation of that world, which he currently lacked. As such, he could only put this matter aside. It was impossible for there to be only one race in the 9 zones. The number and types of living beings in the 9 zones had to be diverse. The uniqueness of the 9 zones lay in the large number of living beings and races that lived within it. It also had laws governing the emergence of new races. This was crucial. The human race could be the overlord of the 9 zones, and they could also unify the 9 territories. However, they could not be the only race in the 9 zones. Chuzan closed his eyes and continued to cultivate. The 9 territories were not his yet, and he still needed to work hard to open the path so that he could take over the 9 territories as soon as possible. The expansion of the world had already slowed down. The turmoil in the 9 zones began to become more and more intense. The Great Daoyuan calamity had reached its peak and was about to end. The battles between the human race and the alliance of various races began to increase. Heiyu also started to kill the Dao realm experts of the Tianyu Tower, causing conflict. Some ancient forces complained to Luo Xinbai, accusing Heiyu of infighting within the human race, attacking the experts of the human race, and trying to destroy the Tianyu Tower. However, Luo Xinbai did not pay attention to their complaints. His attitude made many powerhouses and forces realize that this human king valued Heiyu, and was dissatisfied with the Tianyu Tower. This also put a damper on those who were planning to help the Tianyu Tower. Luo Xinbai's status was currently unparalleled within the human race. Furthermore, he was now an 18th level Dao realm expert. Moreover, behind Luo Xinbai stood the human king Daoyuan realm experts. Heiyu was the mysterious senior's manager, so Luo Xinbai naturally sided with Heiyu. Besides, he had been dissatisfied with the Tianyu Tower for a long time. Chuzan was immersed in cultivation and did not pay much attention to the 9 zones. In any case, thanks to the heavenly Dao laws, he would be able to sense if any unusual situation cropped up almost immediately. Moreover, the heavenly Dao laws operated smoothly and automatically. Ding Yu and Xiao Liang had already entered the desolate ancient zone. Wang Luo and Shang Xing were also there. Qin Qian was still in a state of deep sleep, constantly becoming stronger. Time passed, and soon the 71st year of his residence in the small courtyard arrived. During this period of time, there had been no fluctuations in the chaos, and no hidden experts had made their moves. They were all cautiously waiting for opportunities. Even Yang did not descend with his wisp of consciousness. Chuzan sighed. Despite half a year of assiduous cultivation, he had only extended his Dao path by about 20,000 miles, which no longer transformatively increased his strength every 10,000 miles. Chuzan felt helpless. Still, the system's daily rewards had kept him going. You have remained in seclusion for 71 years, and have been rewarded with world origin energy. Chuzan was startled. World origin energy again. The reward for the 71-year milestone was the same as the 70-year milestone. World origin energy was a precious treasure that could expand worlds and give birth to new life. This was an unexpected surprise. Chuzan received his reward. This time, he did not infuse it into the heavenly Dao laws immediately. He was considering whether to create a new world with the Might Great Dao principle as the foundation. Furthermore, he wondered if it could be incorporated into his Dao path. Perhaps that would help him extend his Dao path further and faster. Was it feasible? Chuzan began to study the world origin energy. After some research, Chuzan found a way to use the world origin energy to help him extend his Dao path. However, he needed to verify it. Thus, he extracted a small wisp of the world origin energy and placed it into his Dao path. In an instant, his Dao path solidified, as if a small world was about to be born. Chuzan's figure, which was condensed from the power of his Dao path, held the heaven-splitting brush and suddenly pointed at the wisp of world origin energy that was about to give birth to a small world. Bang! The world origin energy shattered and turned into a special power of creation. Chuzan's Earth Creation Scripture book appeared, and the Chaos Dao Axe appeared, wrapping themselves around the wisp of world origin energy. Boom! His Dao path suddenly extended significantly. Furthermore, it was abnormally stable. Chuzan was extremely excited. It was indeed feasible. However, it was quite difficult, and he could only control a small wisp of the world origin energy. When Chuzan did this, the entire Great Dao of the 9 zones seemed to undergo some changes, and began to expand into the chaos. Somewhere in the Great Dao, Yi Yujun looked at the lump of power of calamity in confusion. He did not know if it was an illusion, but he seemed to sense that the power of calamity had changed somewhat. It didn't expand, though, so what exactly happened? Somewhere in the heavenly domain. In a hidden independent space, a corpse-like figure suddenly opened its eyes again. He looked up in confusion. What was going on? Why did it feel like the world had changed again? The time isn't right yet. Are things progressing faster than expected? It doesn't make sense. Forget it. I just have to be patient and wait. He then closed his eyes again. This scene was repeated with other hidden experts in various independent spaces. It was the final stage of the Great Daoyuan Calamity, which would herald the start of the Great Dao Calamity. Therefore, it was normal for some special changes to occur. They just had to wait for the right time. They had experienced countless calamities over the many eras, so how could this one be any different? The calamities were just footnotes by which they measured time. No matter how short a Great Daoyuan tribulation was, it would take no less than 100,000 years from beginning to end. Normally, it would take at least 1,000,000 years. Chuzan did not know that using the world origin energy to extend his Dao path would result in such changes. In any case, even if he knew, he would have done the same. It would not change much anyway. Even if he attracted the attention of those hidden experts in the heavenly domain, his strength would allow him to deal with them. Boom! His Dao path extended, and the wisp of world origin energy was completely consumed. His Dao path was now 230,000 miles long. A full 130,000-mile extension. He was elated. World origin energy was indeed a priceless treasure. Within a span of 3 months, his Dao path length had more than doubled. It was terrifyingly quick. Chuzan noticed that Heyu had already come into contact with the existence that he suspected to be a chaotic being. Now, he had to pay attention to obtain the right opportunity to catch this big fish. Chuzan was not worried. Heyu knew what to do. After all, she too wanted to obtain the other part of her incomplete divine soul. However, the other party would not return it to her so easily, and would probably tamper with it before returning it to her to make it easier for them to control her. At that time, it would be Chuzan's turn to act. In the meantime, he would focus on extending his Dao path. Heyu would bide her time until she created the right opportunity for him. Although he had used up the world origin energy, Chuzan did not relax. All of the hard work would add up in the end. He had also already discovered the changes that had happened when he used the world origin energy to extend his Dao path. This was related to his Dao path. After all, his Dao path was a miniature version of the Great Dao, and had a perfect set of laws as well. Moreover, the Great Dao of the 9 zones was its foundation, so it would naturally affect the Great Dao of the 9 zones. The heavenly domain. Hong Yuanchu and the others were also immersed in cultivation. While Motu was cultivating, he vaguely sensed someone trying to contact him. However, he decisively ignored them. It was more important to cultivate. Comprehension and inspiration did not come all the time. If he was distracted and lost focus, he would lose this golden opportunity to become stronger and fall into a disadvantaged state. Hong Yuanchu was very excited as he looked at his own Dao path, which was now 2,000 miles long. To him, the speed at which he was currently extending his Dao path was unprecedented, and brought him immense joy. After all, getting stronger was everyone's dream and goal. Any progress toward that goal would elicit happiness and joy. While the Daoyuan realm cultivators of the 9 zones were immersed in cultivation, the various races of the 9 zones in the ancient chaos world were in a strange mood. After the 3 supreme experts failed to break into the 9 zones and encountered the power of calamity, everyone became wary of the 9 zones. They were afraid that the situation was developing beyond their control. Therefore, they all wanted to find a way to descend into the 9 zones with their wisps of consciousness and personally investigate the changes that were occurring in the 9 zones. In the end, they discovered that after the 9 zones expanded, the power of rejection of the Great Dao increased. Their wisps of consciousness could not descend. As for those experts that were strong enough to send their wisps of consciousness into the 9 zones, they did not dare to do so at this time. A single slip-up would be enough to be discovered by the Great Dao. Furthermore, the major races said that they too could not send their wisps of consciousness into the 9 zones, which was probably to avoid suspicion of any foul play and dirty deals. No one knew what schemes they had prepared in the 9 zones. Because of this, those who could clearly send their wisps of consciousness into the 9 zones refrained from doing so. They too said that they were unable to do so due to the power of rejection of the Great Dao. Everyone was dancing to the same tune. 493 Changes in the Chaos Part 1. Within the demon race's territory in the ancient chaos world, Mo Zun frowned as he looked at Tian Mo Lai. You still haven't contacted him? He seems to be in secluded cultivation, and is ignoring me, Tian Mo Lai said angrily. What about the others? Mo Zun's expression turned ugly. I can't contact a single one of them. Tian Molai's face turned unsightly. Compared to the celestial and immortal races, the demon race had an advantage in the 9 zones. After all, the mixed blood demons were still present in the 9 zones. Moreover, there were already Daoyuan realm cultivators among them. With the current situation in the 9 zones, the demon race would definitely be able to take the initiative if they gained control of a Daoyuan realm cultivator. However, they could not even contact a single one. Or rather, they were being ignored. These mixed blood pawns were actually unwilling to accept my communication. They are just like those pieces of trash that wanted to leave the demon race. They deserve to die. Tian Molai's voice was filled with killing intent. Many of the demon race's Daoyuan realm cultivators had left the 9 zones over the eras. A portion of them were unwilling to be pawns of the ancient demon race. A portion of them were forced to leave. Of course, it also had something to do with him being too unyielding back then and killing 2 troublemakers. This made the other mixed blood Daoyuan realm cultivators even more indignant. They escaped into the chaos one after another, looking for a chance to escape from the demon race. In Tian Molai's eyes, killing 2 mixed blood pawns was nothing. Naturally, he would not think that he was in the wrong. Let's wait a little longer. Maybe the other party is taking advantage of the expansion of the world and is using this chance to extend their Dao paths, Mo Zun said with a frown. Tian Molai nodded. There were still many mixed blood demons in the 9 zones, after all, some of which he had made arrangements to take in as pawns. However, the Buddhists especially detestable. They had destroyed his plans for those demons and rendered his plans useless. Uncle, I'm going to kill that old man. He was the one who ruined my plan. He was furious when he thought of how his hard work had been fruitless. In order to lay out his plans in the 9 territories, he had spent a lot of resources. What was especially unexpected was the appearance of pure-blooded demons in the 9 zones, which was extremely important. He wanted to kill the old man before the other supreme experts of the celestial race returned. We can't start a war. Mo Zun frowned. If the celestial and immortal races really work together to create the Buddhists, then we have to be more careful. Don't target the human race too much. This time, our demon race will not be the vanguard. Why? Tian Molai was not willing to accept this. He was extremely unhappy with the human race. Why can't we target the human race? When he recalled how easily Yang had brushed him off when they fought, he felt humiliated. Mo Zun scoffed. What do you know? If the immortal and celestial races were really working together in secret to create a new power to counter us demons, why wouldn't the human race do the same? The demon race has always been the most hostile to the human race. What if they find out about the plot of the immortal and celestial races and come to an agreement with them to exterminate the demon race? We can't underestimate the human race. If the 3 races really reach an agreement, the demon race will end up in dire straits. Remember, everyone is eager to see our demon race decline. The demons were too arrogant and overbearing. There were many races who were dissatisfied with the demon race and wanted to exterminate them. However, they were afraid of the demon race's power and did not dare to display their dissatisfaction openly. Furthermore, there were precedents for other powerful races joining forces to deal with the demon race. Back then, the demon race had been suppressed severely. If the human race had not risen so suddenly that the other races felt threatened, the demon-suppressing alliance would not have been dissolved. The fearsome, warlike, and bloodthirsty nature that the demons had displayed back then had made all the other races apprehensive. As someone who had personally experienced that incident, Mo Zun was naturally very clear about the potential dangers. However, Tian Molai was still unwilling to give up. It's fine not to target the human race, but we have to kill the old man. Anyway, since we suspect that the immortal race and the celestial race have secretly formed an alliance, why don't we kill him and test their attitude? Given the arrogant and overbearing style of the demon race, it was very normal for them to try and kill an enemy before the arrival of potential reinforcements. Mo Zun frowned. They won't just sit by and watch. If the immortal race interferes, it will prove that they have secretly joined forces. Otherwise, why would they interfere in our feud? Tian Molai said coldly. This time, the killing of Ancestor Yuan Shan was also to test if the immortal and celestial races had really formed an alliance. Ancestor Yuan Shan's status in the celestial race was not low. After all, he was a 9 extreme Daoyuan expert. If they really formed an alliance, the immortal race would not just sit by and do nothing. Otherwise, the alliance between the 2 races would crack. Yuan Shan. Mo Zun frowned. If they were not allied in the first place, Yuan Shan would have already gone into hiding. Furthermore, it might not be a good thing to make things clear at this time. The demon race has to deploy in secret. Otherwise, the immortal and celestial races will definitely take precautions against us, or even target us in advance. Mo Zun did not agree with Tian Mo Lai's opinion. He looked at Tian Mo Lai's unreconciled face and said, one of those guys from the immortal race would have already returned. Mai and Divine Lord Du are already here, so one of them is definitely back. They're just being silent about it. The conflict between the immortal race and the human race isn't as obvious as that of the other races. They've always left a way out. Don't forget that they were the first to take in the human race's geniuses. 494 Changes in the Chaos Part 2. Tian Mo Lai's eyes narrowed. He nodded and no longer brought up the matter of killing ancestor Yuan Shan. In the celestial race's territory, a discussion was also taking place, primarily regarding their plans in the 9 zones. Our celestial race has no descendants in the 9 zones. In this sense, the demon race has the advantage, a celestial race expert said. Ji Dexin has reincarnated into the 9 zones, so he might be of use, another person said. Don't forget that Ji Dexin was once a member of the human race. Now, he's just returning to his roots. Would he still work for the celestial race? Exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Divine Lord Du watched the experts argue and did not say anything. In the immortal race's territory, a sage-like elder was presiding over a similar meeting. He held a horsetail whisk in his hand, and his aura was restrained, almost as if he was just an ordinary old man. However, all the higher-ups of the immortal race were very respectful of him. This old man was one of the second-generation ancestors of the immortal race, and was extremely powerful. Venerable there are definitely changes in the 9 zones. We just have to wait patiently. For the time being, it will be difficult for most to send their wisps of consciousness into the 9 zones. Venerable he was silent for a moment before he continued, we can cooperate with the human race. Ancestor, you wish to cooperate with the human race? The higher-ups of the immortal race were stunned. Why can't we? The conflict between the immortal race and the human race isn't irreconcilable. Don't forget that the human race used to worship immortals and celestials, and that some even joined us. The great Tao calamity this time around is extraordinary. I'm afraid that some existences hidden deep in the chaos will also appear. There's not much point in continuing to suppress the human race. The human race is only blessed by the great Tao in the 9 zones, but not in the chaos. The reason why the human race left the 9 zones is to redirect everyone's attention from their weaker cultivators in the 9 zones. Everyone listened silently. Venerable he was an influential figure in the immortal race, and had to know certain details that they did not in order to be making such a decision. All of us will eventually have to return to the 9 zones. The human race is not weak, so we can allow them to occupy territory as well. Of course, the premise for this is that the human race is willing to cooperate and pay some price. As long as we allow it, the other races can't do anything to the human race. Everything can be discussed. We can even allow the human race's Daoyuan realm cultivators to enter the 9 zones and investigate the current situation. Venerable he closed his eyes for a long time before saying, the chaos will not be peaceful. No matter what, don't deliberately go against the human race. You can even continue to absorb human geniuses into the immortal race. As he spoke, he looked at a certain person in the crowd below and said, you are a human, so I'll leave this matter to you. Yes, that person agreed. Other than the major races, the other powerful races also had their supreme experts return. Moreover, these experts all seemed to be thinking along the same lines. Of course, the prerequisite was that the human race was willing to agree to some conditions and pay some price. The higher-ups of the various powerful races all realized that some changes had occurred in the chaos. Otherwise, they would not have given up on targeting the human race. In the demon race's territory, Mo Zun had received a message and gathered the demon race's Daoyuan realm cultivators. Stop targeting the human race and focus on contacting the mixed-blood Daoyuan realm demons of the 9 zones as soon as possible. If we can take the initiative, our race will have the advantage. Remember this well, there is the possibility that we may cooperate with the human race. That being said, although the human race has advantages in the 9 zones, so do we. The demon experts were puzzled. Ancestor, why do we want to cooperate with the human race? What qualifications do those puny humans have to cooperate with us demons? The situation in the chaos has changed. The other races, such as the immortal, celestial, and dragon races, are all hoping to reach an agreement with the human race. Don't underestimate the human race. If we are tripped up by the human race at a critical moment, the consequences will be unpredictable, Mozun said solemnly. Try to cooperate with the human race in the 9 zones and take the initiative. Mozun left after he finished speaking. The demons did not dare to disobey his instructions. Furthermore, something must have happened for Mozun to give up on targeting the human race. If they could work together with the human race, they would be able to use both of their advantages to make better preparations. All of the powerful demons present wondered if a powerful chaotic being had arrived. Did the chaotic beings who had once occupied the 9 zones, and were hunted or expelled, want to return to the 9 zones to take revenge on the other races? Or was it something else entirely? No matter which situation it was, it meant that the 9 zones were very important, and a key piece of the puzzle in dealing with any changes and uncertainties. In addition to the races of the 9 zones, the races of the ancient chaos world also made some adjustments to their plans. They wanted to obtain a place in the 9 zones as well. The 9 zones had always been the territory of the various races of the 9 zones. Therefore, if they wanted to obtain a place, conflict with those races was unavoidable. The various races of the ancient chaos world had to unite. As for the human race, they were favored by the great Tao of the 9 zones. It was necessary to rope them in and cooperate with them. The human race had always been suppressed and targeted by the other races of the 9 zones. If the races of the ancient chaos world cooperated with them, the pressure on the human race could be greatly reduced. In the 9 zones, Chuzan was unaware of all of this. Instead, he was bemoaning the slow pace of extending his Tao path. Of the world origin energy he had received from the system, only a wisp of it was used to extend his Tao path. The rest of it had seeped into the great Tao of the 9 zones, which resulted in the expansion of the 9 zones. He was thinking about how he could improve the efficiency rate of using the world origin energy to extend his Tao path. If a mere wisp could extend his Tao path by 130,000 miles, then the whole thing would do so by more than 100,000 miles. Chuzan was looking forward to the reward for the 72-year milestone. Hopefully, the reward would still be the same. In the meantime, he would continue to cultivate. Time passed as he continued to cultivate, and the 72-year milestone was approaching. If the reward was the same, it likely meant that he would keep receiving world origin energy until he reached the 80-year milestone. If he could improve the efficiency of its use, perhaps his dream of a million-mile Tao path could be achieved quickly. Your disciple, Hu Tianya, has undergone a further transformation and purification of his bloodline. He is one of the 4 divine beasts of the world and has obtained the recognition of the Great Tao. He has shouldered the fate of the Great Tao and suppressed the monster race, unifying them. You have been rewarded with the monster world and monster Tao principle. The system's reward suddenly appeared. Chuzan was momentarily stunned. Hu Tianya was now a divine beast in the true sense. In addition, Chuzan also noticed the fact that the system's reward mentioned 4 divine beasts. This meant that the 9 zones once had 4 divine beasts. However, he did not know why they had disappeared. He took a glance at Hu Tianya, who was already standing on the highest peak of the monster zone in an awe-inspiring manner. He was looking down at the many monsters below. The might of a divine beast was revealed, suppressing the demon zone. Even the peerless genius of the Azure Dragon tribe had surrendered. The monster race had been united by Hu Tianya. Chuzan checked the system reward. The monster world, this would save him the trouble of creating another world. The establishment of the monster world was connected to the ghost world and Buddhist world, as well as the 9 zones. As a result, the 9 zones became stronger and stronger. This naturally strengthened the heavenly Tao laws as well. 495 Something's Not Right in the 9 Zones Part 1. Chuzan immediately contacted Hu Tianya. Greetings, Master. Hu Tianya said respectfully as he lay on the ground. Your bloodline has completed its initial transformation and you are now a divine beast. You've also unified the monster race. Today, I'll bestow you with the monster zone and the monster Tao principle. As Chuzan spoke, he waved his hand, and the monster zone descended, which was connected to the Buddhist world and ghost world. Exclamation mark! The monster Tao principle was also revealed. Hu Tianya was extremely shocked. Too powerful. With a wave of his hand, his master had bestowed upon him a world. What kind of existence was this? Many thanks, Master. Hu Tianya was extremely excited. With the monster world, the monster race would always have a haven to retreat into. Moreover, they could develop the monster zone and continue to expand it. Once it was large enough to accommodate all of them, there was no need to start a conflict with the human race. He knew that the human race was very strong. The monster race can comprehend and cultivate the monster Tao principle. The more monsters there are that cultivate it, and the deeper their comprehension of the Tao principle, the stronger the Tao principle will become. Yes, Master, Hu Tianya said excitedly. You can continue to cultivate. In the future, when you open up a Tao path, you can also complete and perfect the monster Tao principle. Chu Zan then gave Hu Tianya some pointers. Regardless of whether it was Hu Tianya or Demon Buddha, both were now the masters of a nascent great Tao principle and world. The stronger the nascent Tao principle was, the stronger their race would be. In their respective worlds, as long as the Tao principle did not collapse, they would not die, which would make them almost invincible in their worlds. After the monster world was established, the reincarnation great Tao principle was also introduced there, together with the heavenly Tao laws. With the establishment of the monster world, the heavenly Tao laws continued to strengthen and give birth to new laws. Hu Tianya led the monster race into the monster world and began to make preparations for the opening of the monster world. He also allowed the monster race to comprehend the monster Tao principle to increase their strength. Now that the monster race had been unified and would develop in the monster world, they would not form an alliance with the other races against the humans. The human race also had no intention of provoking the monster race, nor did they have the intention of becoming the sole race left in the 9 zones. After all, once every enemy was exterminated, the only people that they would fight would be each other, and the human race would then become chaotic and divided. Even though they were the overlord race now, plenty of infighting was already going on. In any case, the races of the 9 zones were not so easy to destroy. Although they were far weaker individually than the human race, when allied, they were a formidable force. Chu Zan set up the monster world, observed the improvement and perfection of the reincarnation cycle, and then turned his attention to his disciples. Ding Yu and Xiao Liang, who had entered the desolate ancient zone, and then the primordial land, both had some gains. They even had conflicts with the Tao realm cultivators there. Ding Yu was on the run. Xiao Liang was the same. Perhaps, this was what true geniuses were like. They would rise up amidst adversity and step on their enemies one by one. Chu Zan also learned more about Heiyu's situation. The progress was good, and she had already exchanged some information with the other party. Of course, it would be too difficult for that person to send his wisp of consciousness into the 9 zones. The more powerful one was, the more difficult it was for their wisp of consciousness to descend. Heiyu pushed forward the plan in an orderly manner. On the other hand, she continued to suppress the Tianyu Tower. There was almost no place for the Tianyu Tower in the entire human race's territory. Other than the Tao realm experts, the rest of the Tianyu Tower disciples had all abandoned the sect. The current Tianyu Tower only existed in name. They could not recruit new disciples, and their Tao realm experts were constantly being suppressed. Under Heiyu's continuous suppression, the reputation of the Tianyu Tower was ruined. They became an evil sect that oppressed women. Therefore, anyone who was a part of the Tianyu Tower immediately became the enemy of the human race. The few remaining Tao realm experts in Tianyu Tower could barely hold on, and even thought of leaving the Tianyu Tower. Were it not for the strong deterrence of the founder, they would have directly announced the disbandment of the Tianyu Tower. Now, they no longer pursued Heiyim, or rather, they did not have the ability to pursue her. Instead, they were worried that Heiyu would pursue them. Many ancient forces were waiting to see when Tianyu would come out. Tianyu was a 20th level Tao realm expert. Moreover, it was said that there was a 30th level Tao realm expert behind Tianyu. Luo Xinbai's current strength was weaker than Tianyu's. Of course, Tianyu would not dare to target Luo Xinbai. If Tianyu came out, would Luo Xinbai fight Tianyu for Heiyu's sake? No one knew. Still, as the current human king, how could he sit by and watch a human genius be bullied by a senior? Moreover, Heiyu possessed the Ji family's bloodline. Would the Ji family really sit by and do nothing? 496 Something's Not Right in the 9 Zones Part 2. Ji Dexin, the young master of the Ji family, the #1 genius of the human race, and Heiyu's half-brother, would not stand by and do nothing, right? Many forces knew that Ji Dexin had once stepped in to stop the Tianyu Tower because of Heiyu. The Ji family was a family of ancient human kings. Ji Dexin had the bloodline of a human king, and was known as the #1 genius of the human race. Moreover, the Ji family also had high-level Tao realm experts in the desolate ancient zone. ! Heiyu did not kill the remaining experts of the Tianyu Tower immediately. Instead, she continued to suppress them and kept them on the run. The purpose was to force Tianyu to come out. Chuzan did not pay much attention to Heiyu's plan to destroy the Tianyu Tower and its founder, Tianyu. No matter how strong Tianyu was, he was only a Dao realm cultivator. Even that 30th level Dao realm cultivator backing him up was not worth his attention. Heiyu was indeed weaker than Tianyu. However, in the 9 zones, with the blessing of the heavenly Dao laws, Tianyu could not kill her. He could become a stepping stone to nurture her growth. This would likely tempt that hidden expert behind her even further, who might step in to help her during critical moments, and perhaps give her treasures. Of course, Heiyu would not use the heavenly Dao law's blessing unless it was necessary. She would probably swindle some treasures from that hidden expert first. This was something perfectly feasible given her capabilities. To that hidden expert, treasures that could kill Dao realm experts were just small toys which could be refined at the drop of a hat. If those treasures could help the hidden expert obtain Heiyu's trust, they would send over as many of them as needed. After Chuzan observed the situation of his disciples, he continued to immerse himself in cultivation. Somewhere in the primordial land, a face appeared on the tree covered in colorful spots. It was full of confusion. It did not know why, but it felt that there was something strange about the primordial land. It could sense the existence of new laws slowly appearing in the primordial land. Could it be the laws of the Great Tao? Was the Great Tao calamity coming? However, these new laws did not seem to be as powerful as the laws of the Great Tao. It was really strange. The face on the tree trunk disappeared and continued its hibernation. Elsewhere, similar scenes repeated themselves with other hidden existences. Each one chose to bide their time, waiting for the right moment to awaken fully. The 72-year milestone soon arrived. Chuzan was immersed in cultivation when it happened, unaware of the passage of time. You have remained in seclusion for 72 years, and have extended your Dao path beyond the 100,000-mile mark. You have been rewarded with world origin energy. As expected, it was world origin energy again. Chuzan was overjoyed. Finally, he could enjoy the sensation of a huge Dao path extension again. Moreover, he had already figured out how to maximize the usage efficiency of the world origin energy. Last time, he only managed to extend his Dao path by 130,000 miles, but this time, he was hoping to extend it by 300,000 miles. Chuzan immediately began his preparations. First, he placed the Origin Dao ring into the Great Dao to absorb any world origin energy that overflowed to prevent it from being absorbed by the Great Dao of the 9 zones. After a few more tweaks and changes, Chuzan once again got down to business, and started to extend his Dao path again. While Chuzan was immersed in this process, the 9 zones changed subtly again. Geniuses arose one after the other. As the Tianyu Tower was about to be destroyed, Tianyu, who was in the desolate ancient zone, could finally no longer restrain himself and made his appearance. Heiyu used him as a whetstone while constantly being hunted down and escaping from danger. Feeling that pressure, she began to grow stronger and stronger. More and more experts from the primordial land entered the 9 zones, resulting in more chaos erupting. In addition, the light of the Great Tao would occasionally descend, signifying the appearance of precious treasures. Those who obtained them would instantly break through, their strength advancing by leaps and bounds. Some of the ominous beings suddenly became extremely powerful. There were also many living beings who were infected by their aura and became ominous beings themselves. This sudden change made some experts realize that the Great Daoyuan realm calamity had reached its peak and was about to end. The heavenly Dao laws had already infiltrated over 1/3 of the primordial land, and had even started to make minor inroads into the heavenly domain. The 9 zones continued to expand, and the reincarnation Great Tao principle was also strengthened. It now allowed supreme realm living beings to reincarnate. Many experts of the ghost race began to take on the task of maintaining the order of reincarnation. Ghost officers, ghost soldiers, and ghost generals were all given their positions. Buddhism was also flourishing, and there were more and more people cultivating Buddhist Dharma. The monster world was also developing. The Origin Dao ring absorbed the world origin energy that overflowed when Chuzan extended his Dao path, and began a new round of transformation and growth. The pocket dimension was also changing. Chu Yi and Chu Er's strength had also increased by leaps and bounds during this period of time. They had already reached the 25th level of the Dao realm. In the Great Dao, Huang Long poked his head out in confusion. He felt that the Great Dao was undergoing some kind of change, but he did not know if it was good or bad. Of course, it did not affect him much. He could not leave the Great Dao anyway. Hong Yuanchu had been happily cultivating all this while. His comprehension of the Great Tao had been on the verge of being exhausted, which meant that he needed to continue accumulating it before continuing to extend his Tao path. All of a sudden, a seemingly infinite amount of comprehension surged into his mind. This scene was repeated with the other Daoyuan realm experts that were cultivating in the heavenly domain. As expected, the 9 zones were a land of treasures. The closer the calamity was, the more one could sense the opportunities within it. The Daoyuan realm experts who were about to leave seclusion happily continued to happily cultivate, which made it harder for the hidden experts of the 9 zones in the ancient chaos world to contact them. All of them were confused. Why could they not contact any of the Daoyuan realm cultivators in the 9 zones? Left with no choice, they were forced to contact the Dao realm experts in the 9 zones instead. However, in the end, they failed with the Dao realm experts in the unsecluded cultivation in the primordial land. When they did occasionally make contact, the Dao realm expert's expression was really serious and completely ignored whatever they tempted him with. He just refocused his mind and chased away all the random thoughts, blocking their communication transmission. He said that the heart tribulation was coming, so he had to stay focused and not be tempted. What the hell was a heart tribulation? At some point, the news that before the great Tao calamity would come, the heart tribulation would appear first, spread throughout all of the Tao realm cultivators of the primordial land. It was said that if they failed to guard their minds and resist temptation, they would be doomed eternally. The Tao realm cultivators all took this matter very seriously and did everything they could to avoid it. After all, it was a mighty Daoyuan realm expert who had told them these things. How could it be fake? Therefore, those unknown words from unknown people that claimed to be extremely powerful and could crush the Daoyuan realm experts of the 9 zones had to be illusions. How could they be believed? Furthermore, some familiar Dao realm experts would share their experiences and process of transcending the heart tribulation. They described the process of the heart tribulation to be soul-shaking, filled with danger, and in a near-death situation. Of course, only a small portion of them would encounter the heart tribulation. After all, if the races of the 9 zones in the ancient chaos world wanted to contact these Dao realm experts, they required an intermediary catalyst, such as a bloodline or treasure. The experts of the 9 zones in the ancient chaos world were all confused. What had happened in the 9 zones? Why were they all shouting about wanting to transcend the heart tribulation? Was the change in the 9 zones related to this heart tribulation? Was the great Tao rejecting their wisps of consciousness and turning them into heart tribulations? If that was the case, it meant that the power of rejection of the great Tao had increased even further. This was not a good sign. They felt that something was definitely wrong with the 9 zones. In the Buddhist zone, in a certain temple, a monk was sitting cross-legged and chanting sutras. His body was surrounded by a layer of Buddhist light. He was originally a Dao realm expert of the demon race, but because of the upcoming great Dao calamity, the demon race's Daoyuan realm ancestor had passed down a tribulation-avoiding technique in order to avoid it. After cultivating, the violent and arrogant nature of the past was constantly being weakened. He became calmer. His head became bald. The demonic power in his body was transformed into Buddhist power. His strength had increased. The more he cultivated, the more he comprehended, and the more he realized that Buddhism was boundless. This was especially so in the Buddhist world. After he comprehended the Buddhist Tao principle, this feeling became even stronger. He was originally a 12th level Tao realm expert, but after cultivating Buddhist Dharma in the Buddhist world, he broke through and reached the 13th level. In the Buddhist zone, he was also an influential Buddhist monk. Now, he was doing his best to avoid the heart tribulation. For some reason, there was always a voice from the darkness, telling him that there was a supreme treasure somewhere, and that as long as he obtained the supreme treasure, he could contact the source of this voice, from whom he would obtain a great opportunity, receive guidance from an omnipotent expert, and purify his bloodline. This heart tribulation really disturbed one's mind. He sat cross-legged in the secret room, surrounded by Buddhist light, and chanted sutras in order to overcome the heart tribulation. Not long after, a message that seemed to come from the depths of his bloodline came. "I'm your ancestor, the most powerful demon. My descendant, your opportunity is here." He was furious. The irascible temper that had been suppressed by his cultivation of Buddhism exploded all of a sudden. Following the message transmission from his bloodline, he violently responded, "No, I'm your ancestor. What the hell are you talking about? Kneel down and kowtow, and I'll spare you. What kind of trash are you? How can you be worthy of being my ancestor?" He cursed and swore, spewing out all kinds of vulgarities. After scolding him, he felt great. Had he transcended the heart tribulation? He was so happy. The Buddhist light around his body surged and started to transform his bloodline, turning his demon bloodline into a Buddhist bloodline. At this moment, realization dawned on him. It was no wonder there was a heart tribulation. It turned out that his bloodline had not been transformed, so he had not completely avoided the great Tao calamity. After understanding the reason, he began to focus on transforming his bloodline. Gradually, his demon bloodline turned into a Buddhist bloodline. This was a huge discovery. He had to report this to the mighty Buddha to help others pass the heart tribulation. In the ancient chaos world, Tian Molai was furious. A mixed blood ant dared to insult him. This was unforgivable. Were it not for the fact that he could not enter the 9 zones, he would definitely have killed that mixed blood ant. After some time, he calmed down and summoned some of the ancient demon race's cultivators. He told them to try to contact their mixed blood descendants in the 9 zones. In the end, they were all scolded, leaving them furious and dumbfounded. How could these mixed blood ants from the 9 zones be so arrogant? They could not take this lying down. They wanted to threaten them, but soon realized that the bloodline connection had vanished. The ancient demon race experts' hearts skipped a beat. There were only 2 possible explanations for this situation. 1. The mixed blood descendants had fallen. 2. The other party had used a special method to replace or transform their demon bloodlines into something else. The possibility of them dying was not high. It was impossible for all of them to die together in such a short time. Therefore, the mixed blood demons of the 9 zones had transformed their bloodlines. This time, Tian Molai and the other ancient demon race experts' faces turned serious. The mixed blood demon descendants had actually changed their bloodlines and completely separated themselves from the demon race. How did they do it? The demon race was extremely powerful, and so a complete transformation would require one would have to reverse their life seal within the Great Tao. Even Daoyuan realm experts were not able to do this. Otherwise, those mixed blood Daoyuan realm demons would not have left the 9 zones and headed to the chaos to find a way to escape. However, there was no other explanation for this. Furthermore, it was done in such a short time. This meant that the method they used to transform their bloodline had obtained the recognition of the laws of the Great Tao. This was extremely terrifying. The first thing that came to Tian Molai's mind were the Buddhists, which he believed to be the scheme of the immortal and celestial races. To his relief, the mixed blood Daoyuan realm demons in the 9 zones were still connected to him through their bloodlines. It meant that these people had not transformed their bloodlines. Was the conversion technique ineffective on Daoyuan realm experts? In the 9 zones, at some point in time, the saying that one could transcend the heart tribulation through Buddhism had spread. As such, many Tao realm experts headed to the Buddhist faction to find ways to transcend the heart tribulation. It was also because of this that many experts converted to Buddhism. This caused the strength of the Buddhist faction to increase significantly within a short period of time. This dumbfounded the experts of the 9 zones in the ancient chaos world. They had no choice but to gather together and share the information they had. The 9 zones were in a strange state, and no one knew what was really happening down there. They abandoned their bloodline connections and instead tried other methods, including descending into the 9 zones with their wisps of consciousness. Just as they were about to do so, Chuzan finally woke up from his state of cultivation immersion. Cool. This time, the result had simply been too satisfying and joyous. In one session, he had extended his Tao path by nearly 360,000 miles. Now, his Tao path was over 600,000 miles long. After using the world origin energy to extend his Tao path by 230,000 miles, Chuzan worked hard to clear another 20,000 miles before this. In addition to the 360,000 mile extension this time, his Tao path was now 600,000 miles long. Furthermore, when his Tao path reached the 500,000 mile mark, Chuzan discovered that his Tao path had begun to change. It seemed to have entered another transformation period. He understood that those who had 500,000 mile long Tao paths were the strongest among the Freedom Daoyuan realm cultivators. The million-mile mark would be yet another major milestone, one that had remained an impossible dream for most Freedom Daoyuan realm cultivators. Chuzan sighed. He was finally making great progress. This time, the Origin Tao Ring's Great Tao underwent a huge change. The pocket dimension expanded further, and its laws became more complete and powerful. In terms of spiritual energy, Tao aura, and heavenly treasures, the pocket dimension had actually surpassed the 9 zones. However, the Origin Dao Ring's Great Dao was still in a nascent state and could not compare to the Great Dao of the 9 zones. Thus, it was still inferior to the 9 zones. Chu Zan looked at Chu Yi and Chu Er, who had now reached the peak of the Dao realm. The next step would be for them to open their Dao paths. Since their cultivation and transformation was related to the Origin Dao Ring's Great Dao, their Dao paths would also be opened based on this foundation. Finally, one of his subordinates was going to reach the Dao Yuan realm. Chu Zan was very pleased. This time, it took a little more than 3 months to complete his cultivation session. To others, the million-mile Dao path was an impossible dream, but it was not so for Chu Zan. The Dao path he had opened up was a miniature Great Dao with perfect laws. There was also the Origin Dao Ring's Great Dao, Heavenly Dao Laws, Buddhist Dao Principle, Ghost Dao Principle, Monster Dao Principle, and Might Dao Principle, all of which were nascent Great Daos with complete sets of laws. With 2 more rewards of World Origin Energy, I'll be able to break through the million-mile mark. Chu Zan let out a breath. There was no rush. Until the 80-year milestone, it was likely that every yearly milestone reward would be World Origin Energy. Chu Zan was even thinking about whether World Origin Energy would become a more frequent and common reward from the system after the 80-year milestone. There was a high chance it would, right? But why did the chaotic purple light not continue to appear? Chu Zan did not think too much about it. The chaotic purple light was not as good as World Origin Energy. After all, the system reward was only a small wisp. He did not continue to cultivate, but instead took some time to observe the 9 zones. Heiyu was being chased by Tianyu. Despite this, her strength was constantly improving at a rapid pace. Ding Yu, Xiaoliang, and the other disciples had all entered the primordial land. Kingslayer was busy comprehending the extreme Dao inheritance left behind by the remnant will of that extreme Dao expert. Chu Pingfan had also entered the primordial land, and even Feng Kong had. The Heavenly Dao had not taken control of the primordial land yet, but Chu Zan was not worried about the safety of his disciples. Which unparalleled expert did not rise amidst adversity? If he mollycoddled them, they would never develop into true experts. They had to face challenges and overcome them. They had to learn how to rise again after setbacks. Heiyu herself was an example of this. She allowed Tianyu to continue pursuing her without seeking assistance to temper herself. Chu Zan looked at Yang Tian. Since the last time Yang had encountered danger, his wisp of consciousness had never descended again. Was he too gravely wounded? There must have been an expert who saved Yang. Chu Zan paid special attention to the hidden expert targeting Heiyu. The missing part of Heiyu's innate divine soul was in the hands of this person. Whether it was obtained by chance, or actually related to this expert was uncertain. The only thing that was certain was that the other party had some sort of scheme prepared. What did you gain? Chu Zan's voice rang out in Heiyu's mind. Master, Heiyu said respectfully, there's a chance to get the other portion of my soul back, but that person will definitely tamper with it somehow. This was inevitable. Perhaps the other party would even try to use this portion of her soul to try and gain full control of Heiyu to make her an avatar. There were all kinds of possibilities. It's fine, it's just some minor details, Chu Zan said casually. With his current strength, and various methods, and treasures, he could purify it and remove any latent dangers. Master, that person is a little special. The more Heiyu came into contact with the other party, the more she marveled at the other party's power. It was an extremely powerful existence. She even had a premonition that it was much stronger than the terrifying figures she had seen before on the live broadcast. She did not know how strong her master was, and was a little worried that her master would not be able to deal with that person easily. She even considered giving up on the missing portion of her innate divine soul. That part of her innate divine soul was extremely important. Once her innate divine soul was completed, her talent would skyrocket, and she would be able to reach the peak of the Dao realm within a short time. What's special about that person? Chu Zan raised an eyebrow. Since Heiyu said that the being was special, his guess was probably right. It was a chaotic being. If it was not a chaotic being that had suffered a great setback and was not a chaotic being that had awakened from its slumber, its strength would definitely be stronger than Kun Zhen, Divine Lord Duan Mozun. Perhaps this chaotic being might even possess a million-mile-long Dao path. I can feel that he's very powerful. Even if it's just a vague feeling, I can tell that he's stronger than those 3 I saw that day. Also, I feel like he has a chaotic aura. It's hard to describe, Heiyu muttered. Chu Zan nodded. It was indeed a chaotic being. When the chaos was born, when the world was created, chaotic beings ruled the world and the chaos. Was this chaos being born at that time, or was it born later? The first batch of chaotic beings in the chaos were the strongest and most terrifying. Each of their Tao paths was the manifestation of a great Tao. Furthermore, the great Tao of the 9 zones was the integration of these chaotic beings' Tao paths to form a great Tao with perfect laws. This was also the reason why the great Tao of the 9 zones was so powerful. Of course, most of the first batch of chaotic beings went to explore the edges of the chaos. As such, this one was probably a chaotic being that came later, possibly one descended from one of those ancient chaotic beings, or simply born later. Regardless, it would not be as strong as the ancient chaotic beings. Still, Chuzan himself was constantly getting stronger, and the other party could not enter the 9 zones. Therefore, Chuzan had an inherent advantage. Moreover, once the plan succeeded, the entire 9 zones would be his, and the 9 zones, Great Tao would become his as well. At that point, even the ancient chaotic beings would be no match for Chuzan. It's just a chaotic being, and not even one of the ancient ones. There's no reason to fear it, he said. Chuzan played it down as usual. Since her master could deal with it easily, Heiyu no longer felt worried. Alright, master, I'll make the other party take the bait. Go ahead and do it. With me here, there won't be any problems. Chuzan nodded. Yes, master. After finishing his conversation with Heiyu, Chuzan looked toward the desolate ancient zone where Qin Qian was. A pure white fox was curled up in a pool, and there were tears in its eyes. Although she was not invaded by the other party's wisp of consciousness, it was like watching a sad movie. Qin Qian had absorbed the energy in the pool and had now reached the 10th level of the Tao realm. Her speed of improvement was truly terrifying. Qin Ying had finally killed Cao Tianyi not long ago after going through countless battles, tempering himself, and exploring many treasure lands. He had this ended the grudge between them for 2 lifetimes. The knot in his heart had been removed and his mental state improved. He too broke through to the 10th level of the Tao realm.